Michael has advised me that you are here, and I'm very glad about that. And I was saying, the subject that we take up is so radical. It goes to the root of things. Maybe not entirely to the root, but very close. Can you imagine something so great, so only, you might say, so one of a kind, that even absolute infinity is somehow overcome by it or dwarfed by it? That would be the relationship which happens when the transcendental deity emerges in consciousness and has a self-reflection of absolute infinitude. Or perhaps it has two reflections, one which is completely homogeneous and of one substance, and the other which is completely articulated, which means it has all the little divisions in it, and therefore endless. Well, obviously we're out of our depth, but considering these high concepts does something to the it does something to the mind, and hopefully at least it helps to reduce the limitations of the mind. And we have so many such limitations. Well, there are some of us here, and with Michael and Joe keeping me on track, which is so frequently necessary. Okay, and then, so I just want to say hi to Anne and to Annette, I guess in New Zealand, and to Carl, Pittsburgh, and Francois in Canada, and I think, who else is here? I thought I saw my son Brennan somewhere here, but when the old man gets talking, about this stuff, there's no telling whether it's everybody's cup of tea. Georgina, Francois, Georgina, welcome. And Joan Schofield, welcome to you. Karen and Leslie, welcome to you. And Lori, hi. Nice to see you here. And Martine and Tia, welcome. And Vivian, welcome to you. And also Yvonne Weniger, you're a regular. Welcome to you. Now, if you miss one of these programs, they will be available on Makara. I'm a little behind in posting to the my special postings, but I think BL and Joe and Michael are not behind in terms of the general postings. So you should be able to pick these up if you would like to review, if you would like to. And there's plenty to review. every time when it comes time to, oh, and Anna, welcome to you, Anna Sklar. It comes time to think about what to discuss. There are so many possibilities in this field, and to really gain value from what is discussed, we have to have something more than intellectual concepts. I mean, concepts are good, and we need them, but we need something experiential, or maybe imperiential, if I can coin a word. And that's a special kind of state, and we cannot be sure that it will be ours until it is ours. And then we say, okay, I have arrived. Something more than just talking about a thing is happening. And I admit, look, we can't every moment of the day be applying these, well, what can I call it? The non-qualificatory perception. See, basically, when we look at something, hear something, experience something, it's all about the quality of the thing we're looking at, but not when we're dealing with this subject. This subject, it's all about the beingness of that which we are focusing upon. So the tiny little items that are perceptions within our universe or any universe are not the most important thing. Of course, they are from a practical point of view. But from an ontological point of view, now, ontology, okay, what does it mean? It's the science of being. It's the study of being. So from an ontological point of view, what is important is identification, or at least the capacity. Even if we decide we have to deal with the garment of God rather than God itself, even if we decide that, looming, lurking right behind that decision is the identicality of being, or the identicality of all things in being. Think about that for a moment. So we're looking for the substratum, even though we also have to be practical and deal with the parts and pieces of any item that we focus upon. And that's what's unusual about this type of study. There are very few people, relatively, who are dealing experientially with a substratum, or inperientially, or identificatorily, what a word, okay, with the substratum. The Christ could do that, and he is, says the Tibetan, I think it's in a chapter of John 17, something like that, where the Christ gives what the Tibetan considers one of the most, or the most luminous reports on what identification really is. Now, any time from the period of around the second initiation and onward, one can begin studying identification. And Sanat Kumara, and the divine will. And if we look at the students that the Tibetan gathered around him, only one of them, did not take the first initiation. All the rest of them had, and they were moving towards the second initiation. They were in a good position to study what identification meant to them. Now, we live in such a frenetic and busy world that it seems we don't have time to stand back and really look on and be with being, be as being. We're just terribly involved in all the little particulars. And we have to be thus involved for a while. And you'll notice that even though the Tibetan knows these things, he is involved in many particulars because they are necessary for the divine plan to manifest somewhat in service of divine purpose. So someone like the Tibetan, standing out as an example to us, can cover the high and cover the low simultaneously. And we're going to see that in the book Telepathy and the Etheric Vehicle, if I can ever get myself really launched. It always seems that for the first couple of programs, I make mistakes, and the programs are shorter, and but at least, you know, we're getting started with that key group of disciples, Alice Bailey and Regina Keller and Foster Bailey, and a number of others who had the experience, but they didn't yet have the selflessness which goes with a keen study of spiritual telepathy. Okay, well, that's just maybe a little introduction to the ideas that we are. Now, what I'd like to do is review, or maybe I shouldn't call it a review. Maybe I should call it a consolidation of thought. It's possible we're throwing around a lot of words, and many of them are neologisms. They're made-up words to try to capture something. And many that are not made-up words, they are taken for being neologisms. So I thought we would have the next couple of programs dedicated to understanding foundational concepts. Okay. So in the style that we've been pursuing, which is partially meditation and partially a slow-moving meditative lecture, I'm going to begin this document, which will carry over until we meet again, I'm told, on November 11th, which is, about 4 weeks from now. So I'm calling these a few foundational concepts of radical infinitism, which means absolute infinitude at the root of all universal demonstration. Now, this is then a review of terms. And look, I don't expect that we will know all of this suddenly. We have to be as clear as we can be and then use the factor of comparison. Okay. Jo was telling me that she was venturing into that promised land called Starbucks. This would be a good moment to have one of the products of that place, a nice strong latte, so I could keep myself going here. So if I ever seem to drift off, you just have to know that really I'm meditating. Okay. Now, so put your meditative attitude at the center of your consciousness. And I'm going to ask you for some definitions. And, well, if you want to write down what you have, that's great. You can do that, but at least be aware that there is a proper answer to all of these questions I'm going to ask, and that it would be good, literally, if we were all on the same page, so to speak. Okay. What is Mahamaya? What is Mahamaya? Now, there's also, we'll get into it next week. I want to add this. There is also a supra universal. How about spelling? Supra, I'm not getting it. I'd like to spell. I'm sorry about that. A supra universal, and I'll put it in caps, Mahamaya. But we won't discuss that so much as simply to say that even above and beyond any universe, which after all is an act of finite perception, there is a supra-universal state which ultimately reflects the absoluteness or the absolute. Okay. What is Mahamaya? What is it to you? Because Maha means great and Maya means illusion. And DK is always talking about the great illusion. But he may not mean exactly the same thing. He has a more contained point of view. Now, let me ask this. This will be questioning about universal concepts. Are Mahamaya and any universe equivalent? If so, why? If not, why not? And maybe I can adjust this slightly. Are Mahamaya and the appearance of any universe equivalent? So basically, is any universe a Mahamaya? Now, this is going to tell us that actually Mahamaya is finite. It has a boundary, and that boundary is caused by the cessation of self-perception of a universal logos. Now, let me ask you your opinion, depending on what you think Mahamaya is. Is Mahamaya cyclic? So we can ask, is it occurring all the time, or just some of, whoop, son of mine seems to want to come in, some of the time? Is there any time when Mahamaya is not?
Radical infinitism.
Whoa.
It's radical infinitism, Michael.
Yeah. I shut my eyes to meditate, and look what happened. I got a lot of pluses. It's hard to know even where I am right now. Okay. I'm going to try to delete that. Apparently I succeeded. I hope you're seeing that. is, yes, I leaned on my keyboard, or something did. So is Mahamaya cyclic? Or does it occur just some of the time? Is it occurring all the time or some of the time? Now, there are people who believe in a steady state universe, meaning the universe as we view it simply continues. It never changes. It is from the beginning, well, what's the beginning? And endlessly on. But friends, pause and think. That is not the story of the great breath. Why does this allegory of the great breath come into our consideration when we're trying to look at things esoterically? Now, I know what a stretch all of this is, and fortunately, there's only one of this kind of program, fortunately or unfortunately. So ask yourself now, and hopefully I won't lean on the plus mark. What is the relation of Mahamaya to the great breath? I mean, would there be a universal Mahamaya without the great breath? That is a question. There be a universal without the, oh, that's the great bear. There would be without the great bear, the great breath. Something is breathing. Something is breathing. What's the relation between Mahamaya and the great breath? Now, the nice thing about the great breath is that it defines perpetual cyclic motion. Let's see if I can get this right. The great breath defines, and we would normally call it perpetual motion, but we'll call it perpetual cyclic motion. So, conclusion. If the great breath did not breathe, there would be no universes. Now think about that. The exhalation of the great breath is what generates a finite universe. The inhalation is what absorbs in a kind of universal pralaya, you know that term, all contents of a universe. So this, whatever it is, has been breathing forever. You know, even if we can, friends, even if we can get a hold of one concept, that's already something. So that it all just doesn't seem like, what is he talking about? The great breath is breathing. Now, are we on an inhalation cycle as far as our entire universe goes? Well, we don't know. That's a hard question. Some parts of our universe seem to be coming forth. Some parts seem to be in process of absorption. And as far as the overall universe occurs, well, you know, there are many subcategories of the great breath. Now, people like you and I, really you and me, we are being absorbed by the breath of the monad, which is a tiny reflection of the great one who breathes. We're on our way up, and we're on the path of return. Now, even though we're on the path of return, there are aspects that, like a sine wave, keep on going up and down. The sine wave as a whole may be rising under the general absorption, but there are moments of outgoing and incoming, outgoing, incoming, outgoing, as the soul takes its incarnations. So keep in mind this important idea of the great breath. Exhalation of which moves towards manifestation, inhalation of which leads to subjectification. You know, to be subtle is not the same as being subjective. Subjectivity belongs to the soul, the triad, the monad, and all things beyond. Subtlety may simply belong to the astral body or the mental body. Keep those two distinct in your consciousness. Okay, we've dealt a little bit with the foundational concept of the inhalation and exhalation, the possibly cyclically appearing, perpetual motion which produces finite universes. Now, you know, it's not like what we are ends in this universe. It's true, you will not have the same personality nature. You won't be the same in an external sense when we deal with universes before and to come, but you will be the same beingness which we all are. We have to get used to the idea that when we identify all those others, people, angels, initiates, animals, plants, whatever, they really are us. That's a big step to be able to do that. They look so different. They have different specific functions. But if there's anything that we identify in a universe as a thing, it's really us. It's what we are. Now that's very far removed from our daily troubles and daily experiences in the Mahamaya. But I believe it's true, and it's covered by the ancient mantram from the Vedas and from Brahmanism, thou art that. Thou art that. Now I'm going to go on a little bit here because it's a foundational concept. What is a point? Mathematicians have their idea. I was talking with an excellent mathematician in the, let's call it the usual mathematical discipline. And he insisted that a point had dimension. Almost like it was a tiny dot that inhabited a quantum universe. And there were only so many places these dots could appear. And even though they were separated, there was no distance between them. You would just leap from dot to dot, just the way you do when you consider an atom. There are different orbits, and by a quantum leap, you change orbits. But is that really a point if it has dimension? just think for a moment about a true point, which I contend is dimensionless. What is a dimensionless something? I sometimes call it, I call it an infinitesimal, a next to nothing. Can I do that with a point? Now, this may seem like I'm splitting hairs, but for mathematicians, points on a line are very important. What happens if the point has no dimension? The line itself disappears because all those points are really superimposable upon each other. You don't really move from, if you move from dimensionless point to dimensionless point, it's no movement at all. The line disappears. And what I'm going to suggest is that the whole universe can disappear in a true point. But there's another factor. I know that, we're mostly second-rate types here. I know that. And maybe it's not the way we usually think. Maybe something of the third ray is really needed to think this way. But it can't hurt, because what we're trying to do on our planet, in our lives, in the universe, is put together the third aspect, which is kind of a hangover from the previous solar system, together with a newly developed second aspect. Put 2 and 3 together, it's just like on our planet on a much smaller scale. We've got a third-ray personality and a second-ray soul. We're trying to put those two together. Think about your own personal self. The personality part of you pertains to the third aspect. The soul part of you, whatever your soul ray may be, pertains to the second aspect. So the question about the dimensionlessness of a point, a true point, not just a dot on a line or a dot on a piece of paper, that has an immense, really kind of dimensionness to it. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about trying to define a true point. And it's really because we conceive of things in dimension. A true point is almost inconceivable. But it does tend to mean that all things which can be reduced to a point eventually are infinitely close to each other, and in a sense, therefore, are each other. This gets a little bit demanding. Now, you can see why I want to go over this again, not this part, but this subject next time we meet on November 11th. I guess what I'm trying to say is that eventually all things are a kind of cipher. They contain nothing. And that's a hard, maybe a hard concept and harder to experience. Now, when I start to think of a point, a true point, another related concept is the infinitesimal. I think when you divide anything by absolute infinity, you get an infinitesimal. But now, I'm not saying we can solve it at the moment. Well, I just went over that. Anything divided by, you put the quantity, any quantity, on the top of the little equation, and then divide by absolute infinity, and you get the infinitesimal. But the question arises. I think, friends, this is one of the most difficult little meditations and combined lectures that I have proposed for us to consider, so don't lose heart. I'm trying to understand the implications myself. Why is it important to consider the nature of an infinitesimal? What would you say? I sometimes call an ever lessening. It never stops. It never reaches zero. That's an important thing, because the point does begin as being a vacuity, a kind of zero in terms of dimension, but an infinitesimal. Well, there's always something there because it doesn't reach zero. Now you could ask, is there one type of infinitesimal in the universe? Or are there many? Why or why not? And I would say we are dealing with the ultimate in universe infinitesimal. Intuitively, I think we cannot have an abiding infinitesimal which is not the ultimate infinitesimal. But remember, it never reaches zero. Even when you divide any quantity, it can be absolutely the largest number you can think of, or the smallest number. The result is always the same. The absolute infinitesimal, the ultimate, and let me call it absolute infinitesimal. Now that's as small as things can get, but it's what we can call it also the ever smaller. But remember, all these things are simply perceptions. Now here's what I'm going to ask. I'm not even sure I can answer this question yet, but it is a question. Are an infinitesimal in universe and a true point in universe equivalent? The same. Why or why not? And you know, for myself, when I think of this question, I tend to think that a true point has nothing, and the ultimate infinitesimal always has something, no matter how small. Now that's a question I'm going to work on. what happens when the when the final pralaya of any universe happens. You know the idea of pralaya, absorption, ending. Are you left with a true point, or are you left with an ultimate infinitesimal, an ultimate ever lessening, which is absorbed into the supra, that means above, supra universal state? That's something I really want to think about. The factor of superimposition, one thing on top of another, in universe is to be considered when you think about the universe coming to an end, any universe. It all gets crunched down into what? Is it the true point, a universal true point, or is it an ultimate infinitesimal? They are, it appears to me, different. And then I ask here as well, don't worry, we're almost finished with this section for tonight. Does an infinitesimal in universe ever reach the status of a true point? I guess the way of saying that is, does a infinitesimal, ultimate infinitesimal, ever become dimensionless, contentless, nothing? And I tend to say no. There's always something that remains even in an ultimate infinitesimal, because it never reaches zero. Even though maybe that's my take on it. Some mathematicians say, yeah, I mean, divide anything by infinity and it's zero. I don't look at it that way. And then we're just about at the end of this section. What happens if you superimpose all infinitesimals in any universe? Are we dealing with the superimposition of identicalities? Are all infinitesimals identical? And I would say ultimately yes. And then, carrying on in this vein, is the result of such superimposition the creation of a complete, I'm going to say, dimensionless vacuity, like a true point? Or do superimposed infinitesimals still have content? Now, what I'm deriving from this very abstruse question is that infinitesimals always have content because they are in process of approaching zero while never reaching zero. So they always have something. The point has nothing. Now that's really something to ponder, and tonight when I was preparing for these questions, I said, oh, this is a tough question. And why is it important? Because we are searching, friends, for our ultimate identity. We think we're some little entity, some little something. We are not really that. When we infinitesimalize ourselves, we're coming much closer to what we are. Now, ultimately, we and all these differentiations are the absolute, the absoluteness about which Madame Blavatsky speaks. She says it's beyond the range of all human thought and perception, and who is to doubt that she is correct? It's inconceivable, except we know that it's the only thing every once in a while something comes through. We know that it's the only thing that is the absoluteness. Now, in the secret doctrine, she suggests all this, the eternal parent and so forth had slumbered for 7 eternities. Well, what's an eternity anyway? So, the beginning, Madame Blavatsky was an arhat on her way to becoming a master, which Madame Roerich says she is now. And arhats tend to remake their conception of what the universe really is. Plus, she had the advice of the Tibetan and of, excuse me, Master KH and Master D. Moria. So they kind of turned the universe inside out from the way we are used to considering it with the concrete mind. But, today as I was preparing this for you, I came upon this very difficult question. Difficult for me, and it's not yet resolved. How do I compare a true point, which is dimensionless, with an absolute infinitesimal, which still preserves ever-lessening dimension? Now, what is a dimension anyway? There are different ways to answer that. We oftentimes just think of height and width and depth, the three dimensions, but a dimension is also something else. It's any point of tension along the seemingly endless ladder to the top, funny word for this, but to the top or the capstone of any universe. That's what a dimension is, in my view, anyway. I obviously venturing into such thoughts, I always have to have the humility to say, in my view, you may come up with something quite different. So my last question: does an infinitesimal, of which, remember, I think ultimately there's only one kind, ever vanish entirely in universe? Is a true point a vanishing point, whereas an infinitesimal is not a vanishing something? I realize that I've come upon what for me might be the question of all questions. Okay, and this question may be of profound importance. I mean, look, do you want to know who and what you are? Now, obviously, we say yes. Well, okay. I'm a personality, I'm a soul, I'm a triad, I'm a monad, and on it goes. But are those ultimate, are they really ultimate responses to that question? So finally we discover, and will it make a difference in our incarnated lives, that we are not only the universal logos, but we are a kind of infinitude, an absolute infinitude beyond any finite universe. Will that make a difference in how we live? Or is it just a bunch of speculation which cannot possibly have any practical effect? But I'll tell you, when the heart opens in a certain way and you don't exercise your eyes regarding the particularity of any particular thing, something does happen. A kind of oneness takes over, not a conceptual oneness. And, well, let me say it then, an inperienced oneness, which is the same as beingness. Now, if that kind of thing, or that kind of thought, that kind of experience, makes a difference to you, then you will be not totally frustrated by this once every 2 week study of strange things and non-things. Remember that the absolute, in a certain sense, is the great no thing. And yet we are as well everything in a condition just a little bit removed from absoluteness. It's very hard to determine how it is that from the great no thing, than which there is no other, all things appear. But it necessarily is the case. And to that absoluteness, all things return. The modus operandi of the return, well, how can we know that? But we can speculate about it. And intelligent speculation with the possibility of experiencing what is speculated upon, even a little bit, can make a big difference in our registration of the oneness of beingness. You know, it can come right down to the biblical statement that Christ knew what was in man. No barriers. He was so identified with essence. He knew what was in man. Well, that would be helpful if we want to help. So it's a profound subject, and hopefully you can tolerate it once every 2 weeks or so. Of course, I ask myself the same question. I hold my head and I say, oh, what can I deal with tonight? It's night for me. What can I deal with that might be of interest or value to those who are adventurous enough to stay focused on this subject every once and a while. Okay, friends, that should be it. That should be it for tonight, at least for what I want to say. Now, part 2, which is not complete, begins next time. And maybe it will deal with the contrast between the intra-universal or in-universe life, a finite life, and the supra-universal life. Maybe, I'll take it up that way. But I realize there's no way to deal with these foundational concepts and inperiences all at once. It's just too much for our limitations. So, I'm just checking that we are still recording. We do seem to be. Now, Michael, is it you that is letting us know what's in the chat box, etc.?
Yeah. So let me go back up.
Yeah.
I go all the way back up. Nasa mentions an amoeba that divide infinitely and asks, is an amoeba lessened in dividing? And is a true point divided that way?
Well, it's an interesting question. Obviously we depend upon analogy to help make things clear to our limited consciousness. We all have those limitations. Let's see if I see your amoeba divide infinitely. Is here's the question, Nasa. Can a cipher, a zero, a vacuity, an emptiness, a non-dimensionality, you see, I'm giving a bunch of synonyms, can it divide at all? See, that's the question. Can this something which has nothing divide? Now, as for an infinitesimal, it keeps on, we might say, dividing as it approaches but never reaches zero. I really have to rely upon the idea that there's just one kind of ultimate infinitesimal. It's no good to say, well, this infinitesimal has a higher number than that infinitesimal. They don't have any stable numerosity. What they are as somethingness keeps on being reduced. So you might say for that, well, it's not really true, but for that split second, the infinitesimal is this. A second later, it's that. And the word second is not appropriate. How fast? I mean, now another question comes up due to your question. What is the speed by means of which the ultimate infinitesimal approaches zero? We can't say it approaches all at once. Is there in time, an ever lessening according to a certain speed? Now that's a very debatable point. But I think that your question about amoeba is a little more appropriate for the infinitesimal than it is for the vacuous, dimensionless, empty point, which has no substance which can be divided. That's my best shot at that, and I realize, we are off in this mind-expanding, identicality pursuing speculation. So, we're groping a little bit for the proper words. I know I certainly am. And finally, we'll get to the point with, like DK did, where he says, well, these words frustrate me. I can't find the word in your inelastic tongue called English. Remember, there's a lot of Ray 5 in the mind of the English language. Just like in Germany, we might say, and they have some kind of similarity there. So your question, I'm just going to try to be simple about it, because in a way that's all I can be. It refers more to the infinitesimal than it does to the point. Okay. I hope that's not totally frustrating response. Okay. What else, Michael?
Two comments from Joan and Martine. Thou who pervades the entire universe, and he was all in all.
Yeah. Okay.
And then,
But wait, there's something to be said there.
okay.
I'm sorry, excuse me. That thou that pervades the entire universe is you. That's the hard part. That he is all in all. Well, as much of an all as you get with any universe, and that he, or it, or she, or whatever pronoun you want to use, is you. We live and move and have our being in ourselves. Now, can I be clear about that? We, the little speck, the emanation, the little thing we call a personality and even a soul, we live and move and have our being in the true self which we are. So we are, in a way, both the speck, and that which contains the speck through self-perception. In other words, we pervade and we are everywhere in universe, ubiquity, everywhere-ness. We are both. But comes the time in life when you're not satisfied with being the lesser thing, or pretending, or being deluded into thinking you are the lesser thing. There comes a time when you simply have to speculate that beingness, which reaches to the height of any universe, the universal logoic height, is us. It's what we are. Now, even to take that step, to be simple enough in our consciousness, to be annihilative sufficiently of apparent difference, that's a very big step. I'm not saying I've achieved that. I have my good days and bad days, speaking as a little thing. But every once in a while, the beingness that I am dawns upon my consciousness in a way which is not artificial. It's not just a proposal, it's not just a thought. Suddenly, something happens. And that something ends up being worth wading through these abstruse factors. Abstruse, it means extremely refined in its subjectivity and not apprehensible by a crude mind. Your mind has to be very sensitive and sharp. It has to be at least soul-inspired mind to deal with that which is abstruse. It's kind of a term that ends up being in Master DK's work. I hadn't really seen that term before. Okay, so that's my hope, that the response is something for us to think about. Okay, what else, Michael?
Ann Parker says, a practice I like to do in meditation to try to experience the absolute is to reduce myself down to the point at which I am not, a phrase that came to me once, which might work for others.
Okay, let's get that repeated. It sounds good.
The phrase was the point at which I am not.
Well, that's it. And the I that is not the genuine I. You'll never, you'll never get rid of the true self, is my thought on this. But getting rid of identification with the tiny emanative or emanated thing self. Can I call it that? There can be a point at which that is not. And what's it like then to be the substance, the substandingness? Because when you say substance, people think of matter or whatever. So I'll say, what's it like to be the substandingness of everything in any universe? I mean, one would say, well, gosh, that's insanity, I mean, how can you even say such a thing? But if you're rigorous in your thought, you will realize that as you pursue the being which you are, some unusual perceptions enter into consciousness. And we are after or following or hoping to achieve those unusual perceptions, that unusual sense of self, and that substantiality. We're under it. That substantiality regarding our I-ness beneath everything. But it sounds like a good exercise just to be clear about the self you're getting rid of. And by that, you're meaning that you've reduced it to such a non-entity and expanded your sense of identification into something universally vast. Now, I wouldn't recommend it all the time. I mean, we've got to deal with the Mahamaya. We must. But every once in a while, that oneness of being factor can invade our experience, our imperience, our consciousness, and it finally ends up being a helpful invasion. So, and finally, pragmatically, whatever works to give the thinker, the beer, the identifier, a new sense, a deeper, wider, more expansive sense of self. Okay. Thanks, Ann.
Next question from Jan. Could a true point also be viewed as a place of dark matter, a black hole that is a disappearing place for infinitude? And then she mentions to save the question till next time because she wants you to get some rest.
Well, I know I sound like I need rest, and I don't sleep, you see. That's my problem. So sometimes I'm on automatic pilot, But, even, see, we start thinking about what physics has revealed to us, event thresholds and black holes and things of that nature. Now, all of those are aspects of a a galaxy, and maybe there are a number of them within the galaxy. Um, a true point. See, what's going on within the black hole? In a way, it's a transfer mechanism to the next level of tension, to the next dimension. It's not a nothing. It just is a preventative from certain kinds of is it experiences, certain kinds of light. Our normal universe, nothing escapes from the black hole, but it's not the end of the story. That black hole is a bridge. It might look like a white hole on the other side. It's a bridge towards a higher point of tension, which is very much a dimension, a something. So when I talk about a true point, I'm really dealing with a kind of nothingness, vacuity. I know it's a mathematical concept, the idea of a point, and if you study Euclidean geometry, well, everywhere there's a point without defining what a point really is. I'm dealing with something very hard to define, a non-dimensional something which invites the superimposition of all points until there's only one point. And that one point has to be compared with the absolute infinitesimal, and that point and the infinitesimal all one day, not a day really, but one day in time, will be reabsorbed into absolute infinitude and into, finally, absoluteness. So it has not too much to do with the revelations of modern physics, though you can kind of get an idea of what is allowed to appear on what level. And those events, event threshold, they just don't come out, but they do go up. And until there is a multi-dimensional conception of the strata of our universe, I don't think black holes are going to be understood as the bridging mechanism which they are. Okay, I'm hoping my computer is acting very strange right now, like it wants to kind of fly off the table. So I'm hoping that I don't get a freeze or something like that. Okay, anything else, Michael?
Yes, from Lori, is a true point and absoluteness synonymous terms? Or are these synonymous terms?
Absoluteness is without a second of any kind. It's the one without a second. That's all there is, finally. A true point is perhaps, and I'm still working on this, one of the ways of collapsing any exudation, I hope that word makes sense, any exudation of absoluteness. Whatever came forth from absoluteness, and however it came forth, whether it's the trans-universal deity, whether it's absolute infinitude, whether it's a finite universe, all of that has to be brought back into the undefinable state of absoluteness. It came forth, who knows how, and it will return through a series of pralayas, whether of a universal kind or a supra-universal kind. And then all will be all in all as ever. Cyclically, it's my impression that cyclically, the absolute and no illusory exudation, only the absolute exists without the competition of even very high illusions of that which is apparently separated from it. So the vacuity of the point is a way of leading toward that state of reabsorption. But I don't know how yet. I'm working on that. Because I came up today, as I said, Laurie, with a very difficult problem. Difficult for me anyway. What really is the contrast between the absolute infinitesimal and the true point? I don't think I paid enough attention to that possible difference. But of course, whatever they all are finally absorbed into absoluteness, which reigns supreme. And in a way, it always reigns supreme, except that the illusion of that which is different from it does cyclically appear. I wish I could do better, but that's about what I can say about that. Okay. Michael? Anything else?
No, that's it.
Certainly enough to challenge me, challenge you into a different mode of perception. And all modes of perception are finally, and this is the strange thought, they are modes of self-perception. You cannot perceive another because there is no other. Ultimately, there is no other. When I'm looking at you or anyone or listening or sensing an apparent thing in cosmos, and identifiable in cosmos, I'm looking at myself. Now, I can talk about that until I'm blue, not a bad color, but it won't mean that I experience what I'm talking about. And that's what we're into, friends. We have some great concepts. They come from the abstract mind, maybe, and we don't fully experience their implications, which is, I think, very desirable during our evolutionary process. So I guess what I'm trying to say to you is that what we are doing is very subjective, very substantial, but still useful to you if you use it in the right way. I think I played that song, Isolated Unity, to you once. I can't remember, did I do so?
Yes.
Oneness, allness, allness, oneness, isolated unity. We'll get a real handle on that as we approach the third initiation, and well, maybe even as we are confirmed in the second initiation. None of this is easy, and sometimes it's just better to follow what the Tibetan says. I mean, it's always good. He's never going to mislead us. But occasionally we may wish to pervade the universe on one fine day. We may wish to do that. And that's what a course like this is for. Okay, well, this will be posted on Makara, and it will be posted on YouTube. And I'm grateful for your presence, even though I know it's a little bit taxing. Every time this day comes around, it gives me a bit of a trepidation. As a personality, I say, oh, what shall it be today? But you know where we are going now. I'll continue this the next time. I guess it's Armistice Day? The day, November 11th, the day the armistice was called, the end of World War I and the brewing of World War II. So that's an important day in the world of phenomena. So let's just see. Hopefully, I've been doing this correctly, and hopefully there will actually be a program here. And to some of you, I have a list where I send out things that have the subtitles, but remember, you can eliminate subtitles because they can prove annoying if you're speaking in a language other than English. So there is a way, I think, by just pressing a C on your computer, that you can eliminate those subtitles. So, all right, let's see if this works, and lots of love and many blessings from all of us on the communications team. Now, I hope I hear the lady's voice. That would reassure me. Here goes.